Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started now. So thank you for coming this evening. My name is Chris Hilditch. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works for Utilities, so I deal with the water and the wastewater treatment plants for the City of Lancaster. We're here tonight for our Combined Sewer Overflow Control Plan. This is our second meeting, and we'll be having subsequent meetings as we continue through the process of developing a long-term control plan. So tonight's agenda, we're going to go over what is a combined sewer. We'll look at our combined sewer overflow efforts to date. We'll talk about the consent decree that is requiring us to update our long-term control plan. This is not our first long control plan. We developed one in the early 1990s, 1998, I should say. And this is the second plan we will be developing for the City of Lancaster. We'll look at options for further reducing our combined sewer overflows. And we'll talk this evening about the evaluation criteria and the factors that affect and influence the development of a long-term control plan. We'll talk about next steps. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll take some questions and comments. We'll not be responding to comments this evening, but we'll be collecting comments both tonight and what are available online. We are on the city's YouTube channel tonight, and we will also be archiving this presentation on the city's platform for public engagement called Engage Lancaster. So there'll be additional opportunities to comment. This evening, there are some QR codes in the presentation. You can access those later when we put this presentation online. So in the City of Lancaster, we have two stormwater systems, two systems that collect water and wastewater. One is called a combined system, so that when it rains, we're not only collecting wastewater, but we're also collecting stormwater. So the areas in the inner city central, the areas in the blue-green color, are where we have our combined sewers. And on the pink color, on the outside, are our areas where we have separate sewers and separate storm sewers. So in a combined system, I'm going to show you a graphic in our next slide. When we have an overflow, that wastewater and stormwater combines together, and our capacity of sewers, when it's exceeded, we will have what's called a combined sewer overflow. So here's a graphic of our sewer system. And in normal dry weather, the wastewater travels down the sewer, and then it goes to the treatment plant. This is just a schematic. Our treatment plant doesn't quite look like this, but we will direct flow in dry weather directly to the wastewater treatment plant. But when it rains and we're collecting any stormwater through the inlets that you see in the city streets, all that stormwater and the wastewater combine into that same sewer. It will hit a weir. When that capacity is exceeded, it basically overflows into the overflow structure. And many older cities have combined sewers. Locally, City of Harrisburg has combined sewer, City of Philadelphia, Boston. Many large urban cities that have been, I guess, in the business of collecting wastewater since the turn of the century. And our sewers here in Lancaster, they were built late 1800s, early 1900s. It's a little hard to see, but the picture there is from our archives of people constructing the sewer system. So when you think about it, if it were on the National Historic Register, it would qualify because it's that old. It's over 100 years. So these structures, these overflow structures, we have 5 of them in the city. A little bit easier to see on the graphic, and after tonight's presentation, you can look at the picture that's on the wall. But our 5 locations, we have one up near the McCaskey campus on Clay Street. We have one at Stevens Avenue in this vicinity. We have 2 near the county park. And then one off of New Danville Pike. That's our 5th one. The picture you see here is a picture of our wastewater treatment plant effluent going into the Conestoga River. The structure in the foreground is one of our clarifiers. You can see this off of New Danville Pike. That's where our wastewater treatment plant is. And a little close-up view in the next couple slides. Here's CSO 5. Again, Clay Street, we call that the North CSO. You can see the old structure. It was built near the turn of the century and still in use today. All of our overflows are marked by a graphic telling people that there is an overflow. And we also have some CSO warning lights, which we tell people, don't go in the river. There's a CSO, and that activates by a flashing light. It's on for 24 hours. Then it'll blink, blinks red, blinks red, blinks red, then it blinks yellow. And then after 24 hours, after the storm, it will turn green. Here's Stevens Avenue. Susquehanna and Strawberry are right near the entrance to the county park off of Chesapeake Street. Those are our smallest CSOs. You can kind of see the CSO warning light. It's on solar power, so it's always working. And here's our largest outfall, Ingleside. And that drains a very large portion of the city, and that one is off New Danville Pike. So sewer overflows can occur 55 to 65 times a year on average. In very wet years, we have more overflows. In dry years, like right now, we've been experiencing a drought. We've had less overflows. They can last from several minutes to several hours, depending on the rain event. And if a rain starts at midnight and lasts till quarter after midnight, we would have 2 days of CSO events, even though it only occurred for a half hour. The majority of our wet weather flow is treated at the treatment plant. We have very high swings in flow. On an average day, we can take in about 20 million gallons a day of wastewater that we treat. When it rains, we can go up to 55, 60 million gallons a day. So very large swings when we have wet weather events. You can see by the graphic how much flow is treated and how much can go out that's not treated. So what causes our overflows? It's rainfall. A typical year in our area is about 40 inches. And you can see the last couple years, right? Just have the last couple years shown. 2018 was an extremely wet year. We had 63 inches of rain. So we had a lot of CSO volume that year as compared to a typical year. Now, a typical year is an average. They've looked at about 60, 70 years of rainfall data. And the typical year for this CSO modeling is 1962. That's a typical year. But for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about, it's about 40 inches of rain. And in spite of the drought this year, we have to submit reports to the DEP every year, and one is called the Chapter 94 report because it comes from that part of the regulations, the DEP regulations. It's Chapter 94. We had about 40 inches of rain last year in 2024, and yet we've had a drought in 2024. But the first couple months of the year were really wet. So when you talk about an average of how much rainfall we had 40 inches a year. But we are in a drought. And anyone that's looked at reservoirs or looked at the level of the Conestoga River, it's much lower. And that causes us problems on the water side, on the drinking water side. but a typical year is 40 inches a year. So I told you that this is not our first long-term control plan, that we had done one in 1998. And since that time, we've done a lot of work on our CSOs and on our sewer infrastructure. We've been making improvements at the treatment plant, the pump stations, and in the collection system itself. We also do maintenance items. Okay, everybody's heard of the city street sweeping, right? Get your car off the roadway because we need to sweep the streets. Why do we do that? We're trying to pick up litter, right? Not everybody is neat, right? Not everyone takes care of their trash, and whatever ends up on the street, we have street sweepers that are sweeping it up because we don't want it to get into the sewer system. Those sewer grates that we see, the inlets, right? When it rains, all of the debris can get washed in to the sewer system. So we have programs where we're trying to sweep the streets, and we send out crews with big vectors. They're like giant vacuum cleaners to suck the debris out of the storm drains. So we do things like that to make sure that we can keep debris out of the waterways. We've installed screens at Clay Street to catch debris. Those are before the CSO flow comes out. We also have a program where we're dealing with restaurants and educating residents to control their disposal of fats, oils, and grease. And the acronym there is FOG. That's our FOG program. And if you've been to any of our tabling events and Mayor's Neighborhood Week, we'll have people out there with magnets and with little scrapers and, trying to educate people to, instead of when you cook your bacon, you don't pour it down the drain, you pour it in your trash. So you don't clog your own pipes and you don't clog the cities. We've done a lot in green infrastructure. What does green infrastructure do? It's soaking up the stormwater. And there'll be some slides on green infrastructure next. And certainly, we're trying to educate everyone about the CSOs, like in activities like this evening, as well as educating about litter prevention. Look at that number, right? Big number. We've already spent $88 million to reduce CSOs, and that's through infrastructure improvement. It's for upgrading our wastewater plant, upgrading our pump stations, increasing the capacity of those pump stations. So we have done a lot over the years to improve our wastewater infrastructure. However, there are a lot of regulations. The EPA has required communities like ourselves to reduce those CSO overflows into the water bodies of the United States. So Lancaster is one of those communities having CSOs. We ended up with a consent decree signed in 2017 with the EPA and the DEP, which required the city to do more. So we are now developing that second long-term control plan. So the very general, if you went and Googled Lancaster consent decree, you'll find a very multi-page document with all the requirements that we have for the CSOs. And over the past couple years, we've had some major milestones of modeling the sewer system, developing a water quality model, looking at ways to control CSOs called the 9 minimum controls. So we've had many, many submissions over the past couple years as we get to tonight, which is to talk about where we are now, which is an alternatives analysis. So when we're updating our plan, the goal is to reduce the frequency of those CSO discharges within the city's financial capability. So if we think about financial capability, it's the ability to afford the improvements. The EPA's goals are for us to demonstrate that water quality standards will be achieved in the river. And as I said, we've also had a lot of obligations in that consent decree over the past couple of years. Water quality standards can be revised. Longer compliance schedules can be negotiated so that we can increase the amount of time that we have to do CSO improvements to, again, reduce those overflows. And at the end of the day, our long-term control plan must be approved by both the EPA and the DEP, because this is a regulatory requirement. So our work to date, we've looked at baseline planning. We've done a lot of computer modeling to come up with that typical year and to develop a model, a computer model that mimics what's happening in our sewer system. We've looked at our planned projects over the next 30 years. Long time, right? 30 years of planning. We've looked at different technologies to find what might work here in Lancaster. There's a lot of different technologies that we could explore. We could explore deep tunnels, right? Some work that's been done in Hartford, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, Boston, Massachusetts. Look up their CSO programs, huge tunnels. Not always practical in an area that has a lot of limestone. Okay, so what will work here? So we've looked at the effectiveness of viable options, and we've selected some options for further evaluation. I want to say this evening, I'm going to get into an overview of the technologies, but not the specifics. At our next public meeting, we'll get more into the specifics, okay? So we're trying to do this over time. So my goal here, I have a slide later, is like, I will make your eyes glaze over, okay? So I'm trying not to do that, but I may this evening. So here's our baseline condition, right? Here's that typical year, right? 1962. And here's how many overflows we've had, okay? So when we looked at our typical year, when we looked at our baseline conditions, we looked at what capital improvements we're going to use. You can see the difference in where we are now and where we're driving to be. Okay? So a lot of, any way you look at these numbers, we still are going to have CSOs into the river. So now we're going to look at the options we looked at. And again, the engineering part where your eyes will glaze over. So I'm going to go over technologies now, okay? One of the things we can do is upgrade gray infrastructure. So if we think of concrete, it's gray. In really simplistic terms, it's something that's going to involve construction of pump stations, of additional infrastructure at the plant, more tanks, more pumps, okay? This is what we mean by gray infrastructure. So as an example, the picture here is what our north pump station looks like. It's the largest pump station in our system, and it can pump about 30 million gallons of wastewater to the treatment plant, okay? When it rains, we get a lot of wastewater. It's considered gray infrastructure. So one of the things we looked at is making our pump stations bigger. If we make our pump stations bigger, we have to make our force mains bigger, and the cost of those are extremely expensive. But it was an option we looked at. We looked at green infrastructure. And I'm going to leave you with the analogy. In green infrastructure, we're trying to soak up the stormwater. We talked about all that stormwater ending up in inlets. We're trying to stop that from happening. So we wanted to soak into the ground. In the first picture with the black-eyed Susans, right? You've seen these throughout the city. These are a type of bump out, right? A type of rain garden. The plants are rain garden plants, right? It's a way to collect and infiltrate water and make it go into the ground instead of the sewer system. And these bump outs also help us to calm traffic. Right? People tend to slow down. We hope they slow down. Right? That's another initiative that the city has with traffic calming. But it's a way to get the water to soak into the ground. We've done a lot of tree plantings. We've been encouraging, residents to take care of their street trees. And we've had a plan called Green It Lancaster. And again, that's one of those QR codes that can take you to the plan later. But the benefit of green infrastructure is that we're keeping that water out of the sewer system. We're allowing it to infiltrate. And sometimes underneath the ground, we have what's called infiltration beds. So it's allowed to infiltrate through like porous pavements. We have some porous pavements on Mulberry Street. And if you've ever been to Brandon Park and looked at the basketball courts there, those are also porous asphalt. So these are ways that we can get the water into the ground and let it seep into the ground rather than being directed into the sewer system. So some pictures there of porous pavements, and of course the picture in the middle, planting a tree. As a tree will grow and that root system's there, it will also help to pull water into its root system instead of, again, the water going into the sewer system. We can store excess flow. We're looking at storing some flow under the McCaskey soccer fields. We have about 5 acres, and this flow would be captured in the tank constructed below ground. And again, we're retaining that excess stormwater flow so that it doesn't go into the treatment plant. When it rains, we can pump it in there later in dry weather flow. We're looking at separating source in key areas of the system. Some are listed there on the right-hand side. We're looking at separating stormwater flow from the sanitary flow by constructing new sanitary or storm sewers. And some of those sewer separations, especially in the area here in Duke Street, right, the area we're in now, if we can separate some of the sewers in this area, we can reduce the CSOs at the county park, at Susquehanna and Strawberry CSOs. We looked at maximizing flow to the treatment plant. We've already done some of those projects by increasing the capacity of pumping at our north pump station, but we also looked at some additional improvements that we can implement to increase capacity. So what did we end up with? We're going to look at the gray infrastructure, the green infrastructure, storage, sewer separation, and maximizing flow to the treatment plant. There's a lot of things that we evaluated that didn't make the cut, right? I mentioned the deep tunnels. Right? That's something that we evaluated, but the costs were so high, it was something that was dismissed during the analysis, as an example. So I mentioned that we had already planned projects over the next 30 years, and we looked at CSO projects. And as we summed up the projects and looked at the different basins, and the basins are named on the left side of the screen, right? North, Stevens, Susquehanna, Strawberry, and Ingleside. Those are the basins we looked at. We can see as a baseline what we have after all our projects are done, and as we make investments in the system, how we can drive the CSOs, the number of events, down. Okay? If we spent millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, right, much in excess of that 73 million investment that's shown in the last column, we might get these down, right? But remember, I talked about spending to the limits of our affordability. Spending to the limits of our affordability. And you can see with, the minimum investment here of 30 million, we can reduce, especially in Ingleside, our CSO events, but they're not going to go down to zero at our larger CSO locations. So a lot of options, and now we're going to talk about the next steps. How do we select the best options for the city of Lancaster? We looked at several criteria. Regulatory compliance. So remember I said that this is directed by the EPA and the DEP. So we do have a regulatory requirement to do this plan, as well as to do our best within the limits of our affordability to reduce our CSOs. So we look at CSO performance. How often do the CSOs occur? Right? 30 in a year, 50 in a year, the frequency, how many? And then we also can look at the wet weather volume capture. Right? I can still have a CSO event, but less will overflow, so less gets into the river. So frequency, how many times it happens, and the volume of capture, how much can I keep, right? How much can I infiltrate into the ground or still treat at the wastewater plant? What drives regulatory compliance are the water quality standards. These are set by the EPA and the DEP. The ones we look at are bacteria. They affect recreation, right? No one wants to swim in a river or kayak or wade. Right? However we want to use the river, we don't want to swim in bacteria. Right? We don't want to swim in wastewater. The rivers are there for aquatic life. Right? The fish have to survive. The salamanders have to survive. Right? The national salamander or the state salamander, the hellbender, right? It needs to survive. Right? So the concern is dissolved oxygen, suspended solids, ammonia, what we discharge from the wastewater treatment plant. And floatables, debris, right? No one wants to see pieces of toilet paper going down the river. So our efforts are always to capture and to screen. We want to avoid any of these issues. So this is why we're trying to do a CSO, or I shouldn't say do, but continue to do, right? Again, this is our second long-term control plan. So we can look at water quality. We've developed a water quality model to show the impacts on the CSOs on the Conestoga River. So we look at how does dissolved oxygen change? What does the effect of solids have? It can predict, this model can predict the water quality improvements. But we also have to acknowledge that the Conestoga River is heavily impacted above the city limits. Okay? Heavily impacted from non-point source pollution, from farming, from agricultural runoff. And if you want to learn more about the background of the river, there's another QR code that you can learn more about the impact of the upstream conditions. So we looked at constructability. Remember those tunnels? Could we construct those tunnels? So we have to look at constructability, the availability of land. How complex is it to do the construction? And whether that new infrastructure can be easily maintained. Okay. This is an overview of our wastewater plant. Right? So we looked at how we could expand that plant, right? We're constrained by the land too. So our site there can only accommodate so much additional infrastructure. We looked at the community objectives. Right? Our future Lancaster, the comprehensive plan. Right? That was developed as a framework for what the community wanted and what was important to the community, to Lancaster City. So maintaining the quality of life is important. From a CSO perspective, reducing bacteria, which hampers recreational use of the Conestoga River, is important. And We are upstream of the Chesapeake Bay, right? Conestoga discharges into the Susquehanna, and the Susquehanna goes into the Chesapeake Bay. And certainly the Chesapeake Bay has been studied for many years on the impacts of nutrients and sediments. So those of us that are all upstream of the Chesapeake Bay, we're doing our part to what we discharge into what our wastewater plant discharges is in compliance with all of those standards. And last, we looked at cost. And we'll develop metrics on what's the cost per gallon captured, right? So we want, you've heard the phrase, right? More bang for your buck. So we want to be able to choose options that gives us the best return on our investment. You know, the capital cost, the future operation and maintenance cost, and nothing lasts forever, so the referred to future replacement costs. Because everything we do in infrastructure has a finite life, right? Your car engine has a finite life, your roof has a finite life, well, so does our infrastructure. But I will say one thing, we've gotten our money out of our combined sewer system, right? Remember I said it was built in the turn of the century, and we're still using it. But we have to look at the customer's ability to pay. So that's up next. One of the things that is required as a submission to the EPA and DEP is what's called a financial capability analysis. So everything has an acronym, so that's the FCA, the Financial Capability Analysis. And that looks at that overall ability to pay, right? What's the impact on a typical residential customer? So if we go out 30 years, right? We've gone out 30 years, and we look at a snapshot, so it's only a point in time, of what the residential indicator is for a resident paying a sewer bill and a stormwater bill. Okay? All those improvements over 30 years. And EPA looks at, if we look at the far right-hand side of the screen, you can see low burden, medium range burden, and high burden. So if we look at what the percentage of that typical, whoops, sorry about that, what a typical sewer and stormwater bill is as a percentage of an average income, median income. We have what's called the residential indicator. So it's a percentage of the city's median income. So what's a median income, right? If I have 5 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? We can add all those up and we can get an average. But a median, right, would be the gentleman in the blue shirt, right? If I have 5 people, 2 on either side, he would be the median. Okay, so if we ranked all of the incomes throughout the whole city, that's what we're comparing it to. And we get these numbers from the census data. Okay. So if we look at those costs against the median income, and we've done 30 years worth of improvements, about 2.26% of that median income is going to be used to pay a sewer and a stormwater bill. So in the EPA's metric, that would be a high burden, right? 2.26%. Right? That's our baseline. And then as you see the percentages increase, remember I said those little buckets of projects? 30 million, 51 million, 63 million, 73 million. As we add a number of projects, you can see that percentage, that residential indicator, against the median income and what the sewer bill would be, it goes up. So what will end up being negotiated with EPA is how long do we have to implement improvements to reduce the CSOs, and how long, right, how long that will take, and how much they will require us to spend. And that all has to be negotiated. Right? So it takes a long time. It's been a long time, right? We've been at this since 2017 through all these analysis, and we have a lot longer time to go because all of this, again, will have to be negotiated. So what also influences, right? It's not all about just the CSOs. We have critical infrastructure that we're already maintaining and that we need to see being able to be used by future generations. Our drinking water systems, right? The wastewater system and the stormwater systems, which we talked about tonight. The city has to be able to continue to invest and maintain that critical infrastructure. There's a lot of regulatory compliance. Right? In sewer, we talked about tonight, but we could have another public meeting and we can talk about water. And at some point, we'll have one of those. We have to be able to meet all of the new requirements. We've been bombarding the citizens, the customers of our water plant. Please take a picture of your water service line, right? That's going to continue. We've got to get an inventory of our water service lines. Many of you, you're all water customers. You've received letters, right, that there's PFOA in the water. There's PFOA in the water, right? Anybody have a waterproof jacket on tonight? You do? You have PFOA too. Make brownies in a cake mix, right? Easy to get out of the cake mix, flows real nice to get out of the package. PFOA, firefighting foam. Right? A lot of today's inconveniences have resulted in pollutants that now water has to take care of. Right? Water's not a polluter. Right? We view ourselves as giving something life-sustaining, and yet manufacturers of chemicals over the years have developed something that now has been deemed a problem. So we have to spend money on water. Right? We're spending money on the Chesapeake, right? Chesapeake Bay initiatives. All of the policies, right? We want a good future for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, for the next generation. So we have a comprehensive plan that guides that, our future Lancaster. And we have to be able to afford it. So when we start developing our preferred alternatives, that'll be the next public meeting. All of these factors will influence the long-term control plan. And we're going to try to choose the best that we can for the city of Lancaster. So in summary, the EPA and the DEP are requiring that we reduce our CSOs. Right? We're not going to be able to do nothing. But we recognize that those CSO reduction is going to cost money. The actions and the time frames of when we implement these projects, it's going to depend on that cost burden, right? That financial capability analysis. What can our customers afford? And that burden will be analyzed using a cost analysis that the EPA requires under the consent decree. Right? That's that financial capability analysis. But at the end, that's a really important last statement. We're doing our part to reduce the CSOs, but the CSOs, their impact, have only a little impact on the overall water quality in the Conestoga River because of upstream conditions. Okay. So we'll do our part, but we'll still have issues with the Conestoga River. I thank you for your attention tonight. Please write down your questions. If anyone wants to say anything or make any statements or talk about any questions, we'd be happy to do that. And for those of you joining remotely, thank you for your attention, and I'll be signing off now. Thank you. Oh, that's our QR code. And if you also Google Engage Lancaster, you can get to the page that we're on. One more slide. Yeah, I got it. One more slide. One more slide. And here's our email address. ltcpcomments@cityoflancasterpa.gov. Okay, I'll wait a minute so you can take that. For those of you in the audience, ltcpcomments@cityoflancasterpa.gov.